Like many things in life, the most profound questions tend to be simple. It's the existential moment we all reach in life when you begin to question who you really are, why you're here, and what's your ultimate purpose in life. As you age, the desire to fulfill these questions only magnifies. Especially with today's overabundant, overwhelming set of options, this question is more complicated than it's ever been. When people first settled the New World, for instance, many died in transit at sea just for a one-way ticket to fulfill their hopes and dreams. Punishing games like the Oregon Trail from my childhood made this humorously and vividly clear even for travel inside the US. The point is, with life presenting all the options it does now, we are no longer limited like the days of our ancestors. But with the advances in travel, these options come at a price. Do you risk alienating yourself for the career opportunities you seek, or do you stay put, instead finding happiness in the people right in front of you who you know and love? That's the larger, incredibly simple question at the heart of this film. Should I stay or should I go? I'm Jason from Screen on Point, and this is Columbus, a modern take on the most relatable question. So just to get you up to speed, obvious spoilers on the film from here on out, FYI, but the need to know elements are that this film takes place in a small, real-life town called Columbus, Indiana, known for its unlikely architectural design, and entails two people from opposite ends of this should I stay or should I go dilemma. A, you've got the hometown character in Casey who has all the potential in the world, but refuses to leave her mother, a recovering meth addict, whom she adores. And B, Jin, a man who did decide to leave for greener pastures and is regrettably visiting the small town Casey is from because his father, a world-famous architectural historian, has fallen ill and will likely die soon. Unlike Casey, Jin is not at all close with his father and resents him for putting work over family growing up. But one of the more fascinating elements is what each of these characters represent. In many ways, Casey lives a profoundly simple life. She shuns technology and prefers old-fashioned approaches to her daily life. She even works in a library of all places. She is essentially unadulterated by the modern world in this sense. She admires the stillness and space in life. Casey represents the past along with the staying mentality. Jin, on the other hand, fulfills a lot of cliches of modernity and the young professional in general. He's never dressed down. He's up on the latest tech of the day and all its distractions, the latest slimwear fashion, and even works remotely in translating Korean text to English, much of which would likely see the light of day on an e-reader or tablet before it would ever reach Casey's library. Jin represents the present along with the going career option. And you see this contrasted in many ways throughout the film. When they compare phones, how they dress, their career choices, there is some overlap, sure, but each represents the stay or go approach. So how does the film then go about playing upon these opposite sides, and how does it explore the title question? Well, interestingly, with a game of attention. The film's director, Kogo Nada, is acutely aware of his audience and their expectations in cinema. He is himself a video essayist, only recently turned director. Much of his work has achieved viral status on the internet with his videos for their pointed and astute observations in classic cinema. So he is clearly connected with the modern world, but like I said, he does choose to focus on many of the classics of the past. And one of the key ways he plays with your attention is by holding extremely long static shots that are held far longer than the average film you would watch these days. For instance, in the opening near 5 minutes of the film, before any real dialogue apart from mumbles and a name being frantically shouted, there is only a mere 16 cuts. The longest shot in that opening sequence is held for a staggering 46 seconds, without even the slightest bit of camera movement. And that's not even the longest shot of the movie, mind you. So compare those 8 cuts and near minute-long shot in the first 5 minutes with something like Avengers Infinity War. We'll stop at 4 minutes and 39 seconds because that's the same spot we stopped for Columbus. In that exact same span of time, The Avengers has 72 cuts. And yes, I know this is an action film, of course it's going to have more cuts, but the larger reason for comparing the two is that this is what modern audiences are used to right now. These films were even released within inside a year of each other. It's the game Kogo Nada is willing to play, one he directly addresses with Rory Culkin's character, Gabriel, in one of the earlier scenes.
No, he's not saying it's an actual myth. He's just questioning this common usage of attention span, or really this idea of a shortening attention span. I had this professor who used to go on and on about the idiocy of video games. He talked about how his son would play for hours and that he once tried playing with them, but found it completely dull after just a few minutes. If this was reversed, If the son was talking about how his dad would read for hours, and he once tried reading with him but found it boring after a few minutes, well, we would accuse the son of having a short attention span, right? But why don't we accuse the professor of having a short attention span? What this guy is saying is it's not a matter of attention, but of interest. The professor doesn't have patience for the video game because he's not interested in that kind of experience, in the same way that the son might not be interested in books. What he's offering is a critique of a critique. Kids pay attention to things that interest them. The real question is, what interests them, or us? Are we losing interest in things that matter? What about everyday life? Are we losing interest in everyday life?
And yes, that is Macaulay Culkin's brother, and yep, that's also him from Signs, in case you were wondering. Anyhow, this is one of the most enjoyable parts of the movie for me because it requires you to think about what we commonly say or think, especially with this particular cliche about gamers. But more importantly, it allows you to peer further into the director Kogonada's underlying focus in this film. It's a war of attention span, or rather interest, that he highlights with these extremely long, by typical standard shots, which itself is an ode to one of the director's biggest filmmaking influences, Japanese film director and screenwriter Yasujiro Ozu. He was a pioneering filmmaker who died in 1963 but was active all the way up until his passing, and he started his career in the 1920s. Part of what he is known for are simple, static, unwavering wide shots that are captured with a 50mm lens. Why 50mm? Well, for the uninitiated, it's considered the closest view to that of a human eye. A large part of what Ozu looked to capture were depictions of life as we would see it from our own view as the camera seeks to mimic us. And this is not merely just the style in which Kogonada shoots his scenes, where you can draw comparisons in his own essays from, but it's also another metaphor for his view on modernity and the unique problems we now face in our daily lives, struggling to find our own way. It's a callback to the past, simplicity versus the new problems that even the best advantages in our lives bring with them. There's a price to every single one of these new technological achievements and devices that we can't seem to live without anymore. It's not at all like the Black and Mirror variety, mind you. There's no diabolical or dangerous plot. It's just the predicaments that arise from them that are wholly grounded and realistic. And with these particular filmmaking techniques, it's no wonder that one of the conduits for this story and tackling this question is architecture itself. Where Ozu was famous for positioning his cameras at floor level, otherwise known as the Tatami Shot, based on a tatami mat, where you would view scenes from the perspective of a person sitting on one of them in Japanese culture, Kogonada similarly often positions the camera as if it was from the perspective of the buildings themselves, their interior walls, and even the furniture in some cases, many of them symbolically aged and timeless for their artistic merit, that are witnessing the lives of its inhabitants or passers-by. It's part of what makes Columbus, Indiana's old and timeless architectural style so relevant here. It conveys the impermanence and truly short lives that we lead in the span of things. There's a certain objectivity to it, but that also doesn't mean it's a cold and unfilling one, which typically these wide spaces would usually represent in filmmaking. In an interview with Slant Magazine, Kogonada details what these perspectives mean to him. It was my desire to see how these two things relate, and then I feel like in some ways you can only feel absence if you really appreciate presence and vice versa. And if you don't really appreciate presence, then absence isn't going to hit you as hard, and vice versa again. And humans bring that. I think it makes you attend to spaces and time itself. I think humans are the critical element of that. For him, the relationships we have to objects in space are more than the mere moments that we occupy them. They have their own character, emotional makeup, and storytelling properties. And that's where this battle of attention or interest, as mentioned earlier, really takes place, especially when you make it to the 45-minute mark about halfway through the film. This is the pivotal scene where we learn of Casey's mother and her addiction to meth, Casey's love for architecture, and its calming power over her. This leads to a discussion about how she's been offered a chance to study with the architect of the building they are parked in front of, and the chance to even audit some of her courses at Yale. While all of these major plot points are being discussed in Casey's ultimate dilemma with whether she should leave her fragile mother or not to pursue her career, the camera fixates for incredibly long periods of time. While inside the car without cutting a single time or moving position, it remains unwavered and fixed for a full 2 minutes and 18 seconds. As the conversation intensifies, the two move outside of the vehicle, and while the cuts become a bit more frequent, it's only slightly, as there's 2 more minutes before another cut, then 2 back outside the car for another minute, one last cut, and finally another minute back at that same shot. We're approaching 5 minutes at this point of looking at the exact same thing. It really tests your patience as a viewer. On my first watch through, I'll admit I became frustrated and succumbed to the urge of glancing at my phone once or twice, because while beautiful and mesmerizing in some of the ways that Casey vocalizes, that interest runs dry over time. And particularly because of these push and pull moments of the movie with my interest and therefore ability to give it my full attention, it does make for a more contentious viewing experience than one might expect. Because of this factor alone, it's certainly not a movie for everyone. But I do feel that that is by design. It's back to this issue about our modern lives, the ability to keep ourselves stimulated mentally in the way that Gabriel poses with the book and video game debate from earlier on. It challenges you to fight those urges to move around or glance at your phone or find something else to do because you're feeling bored. Simply put, it's the novelty of wanting to have a change in focus more frequently. And I didn't understand this on my first viewing until about 3/4 of the way through the film, where I became more aware of that fact and I had started to forge a sort of connection with the two lead characters. I started to see it more like a real life conversation that doesn't have a ton of cuts. It's just you and that person and where you're standing. I began to settle in with the backdrops, stop analyzing them so much, and just simply focus more and more on being present and listening intently to the words being conveyed. Their developing relationship from strangers to what you would expect to ultimately become a romance was subverted. It never fully bloomed into a relationship. It's the game that this movie and its director choose to make you play. Hopefully, if the game is designed correctly, then it does pique your interest like it did mine and draws you in, but of course there are many types of games, so it's not guaranteed, just like any other form of art, that it will translate for you. Or going more literally with Gabriel's reading, perhaps you could just be a bit more bookish than a gamer and this isn't for you at all. But if you can challenge yourself to do so, then the film has a ton of rewards. And furthermore, it's only upon researching this film that I've realized some uncanny parallels with my own life. I've actually driven through this town a ton of times when I used to live in Indianapolis on my way back to Tennessee when visiting family and friends. I've driven over this bridge what feels like 100 times and never had a clue what sort of window it was into the oasis of a small town in the artistic and architectural community. That and Kogonada, as it turns out, also lives in Nashville where I live. Go figure. So there might actually just be a unique relatability I have forged with this film, and it seems the more and more I watch it, the better it gets. But of course, that's not just me. This film has won plenty of awards and is critically acclaimed. Furthermore, there are many more influences that you can see inside this film, like the Wes Anderson style shots Kogonada has covered in his own past essays, like the examples of perfect symmetry, but it's particularly the influences of Ozu and the period in which this calls back to in order to fully complete his metaphor of what we are challenged in modern times. Of course, there is no true answer to the title question about should you stay or should you go. It's far too personal and open-ended as a question for a film to buckshot solutions. It'd be like a horoscope at that point. It's really about exploring that question and what it means to give a sense of not being alone and wondering what you should be doing in your life. Some of you may just be first wrestling with this question of relocating for a career and finding a new life far away from home, or have been there and done that. But that's part of the beauty of this film. It's the deeper and more salient opportunity to explore that from a new perspective. Sometimes, just like the movie, it's about giving these questions your attention. Hey everyone, thanks for watching that video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. We post at least 2 videos every single week, and it really helps us out when you do so. Make sure to let us know what you thought in the comments down below, and you can follow us on the official account at Screen On Point, or you can follow me personally at Jason the Heart on Twitter. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.